Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Muse Memorandum. I'm your host, JJ, and today we are on episode 4 of season 1 in the conversation series. We have another excellent guest with us today, Dan Shukis. He's a very talented artist, musician, and podcaster based in the Colorado area and originally from Chicago area. He is the co-founder of the band Moonstone, Quill, and the host of the popular Cosmic Keys podcast, among other excellent projects. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome you onto the show, Dan. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, JJ.
Well, thank you. I was delighted you reached out to me to come on, so I'm thrilled to have you here. And I guess we can just get started. If you would be able to tell us a little bit, you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your work.
Yeah, so I grew up, as you mentioned, in the Chicagoland area, like Chicago suburbs. Um, Always like this is an art show, art interview. So like from a young age, I was like that kid, like the kid with markers, the kid that was like the best at drawing in class. Not to toot my own horn, but like that was like my childhood. And then for kind of a long period of time, I didn't really embrace that as much. I was into like alternative type stuff, really into live music and stuff when I was a teenager. In high school, I went to a lot of concerts in the city of Chicago when I was a teenager, just kind of taking the train and doing stuff like that. I ended up going to school in Boulder, Colorado, University of Colorado. Um, and while I was in school, I mentioned this in the bio that I submitted to you, but a kind of pivotal thing, funny enough, for me that led me into like really the art life was a snowboarding injury that happened when I was 20 years old in 2008. I broke 3 vertebrae in my neck and had to like go through that recovery and sort of existential crisis like right in the middle of college. and and I think we initially connected because you're familiar with my podcast, the Cosmic Keys podcast, in which I talk about spiritual topics. I do astrology. I talk about healing and astrology and things like that. And I guess I wouldn't have been into all of that in itself if I didn't need to learn about that type of stuff like healing, esoteric topics, life after death, all that kind of stuff really was kind of kicked off by that injury that happened, which was like kind of like a pivotal moment in my story. So that happened in 2008. And then by the time I was done with school, um, in the topic of like healing and health and all and mental health, all that stuff, basically it was like there was kind of some like PTSD going on after that happened, and I didn't know what that was. I was just kind of like, okay, like I'm in a neck brace, I can just go back to college, like let's party, let's go. But then it would be like, why am I like depressed at the end of the day? Like what's going on? Like I never dealt with that. And so basically in 2010, I started addressing that for the first time, like after I was wrapping up school. um I basically tried yoga for the first time and then kind of had like a spiritual awakening. Like I don't want to say like Kundalini awakening, but it was like crazy at the time. It was really one of those moments where it was like spirituality, God, all of that was like real, like very real suddenly. And I'm talking about this because you're somewhat familiar with my podcast where we talk
Yes.
all about this. But so I had that happen, and this was in 2010 when yoga was not mainstream. The way it's crazy how popular yoga has gotten since then, but you know, it was like um, healing my body, which I had like chronic pain and PTSD type like mental health stuff going on, and then suddenly it was like aligning the like kind of healing the body and also having this like crazy spiritual awakening as that happened. Um, and then there was kind of another moment where all this stuff was coming to the surface, and I went to the free therapist that was like part of tuition. Like if you're in college, you can go and get like you can talk to a therapist. So when that was happening, a lot of stuff sorted itself out. So that was like this was in the fall of 2010. So that was like a while ago. I was 23 at the time and about to graduate with 2 degrees, one in English literature, which is more in line with like my creative side, I guess. And the other one was in economics, which was like the straight and narrow, like get a good job thing that I did because I just thought like, oh, I've got to do something to be a normie, you know, I've got to get a job after college. But going back to the therapy session, it sounds really corny, but there was this like breakthrough moment where the therapist was like, well, how do you identify, or like what are you? And I was like, that's the easiest question ever to answer. Duh, like I'm an artist. And it was like it sounds kind of cringe or kind of corny to retell this story, but it really was like, oh shit, you know, like I was having these yoga spiritual awakening experiences where everything felt very clear and definite. And this was that moment that was clear and definite. It's like you almost died. You have a vocation in life, and there's only one thing. Like you have to be yourself. You have to be that little art kid that you always were. You have to be that person who you were as a kid, who was openly just like, yeah, good at drawing, creative, imaginative. Like you have to dedicate your life to that. And so at that point, when I was like 23, it was like, all right, like gung ho, ready to do it. I graduated, uh, and the economy kind of sucked. So I did a lot of traveling, and I really, I guess we're talking about like my artistic career or whatever. At that time, I was really, and this was in 2010. It was a little bit of different times, but I wanted to be like a fiction. I wanted to be like a writer, like either like a novelist or just sort of like a storyteller, because I had gone to school and studied English literature. And it was still in that kind of like naive time where you were like, oh, anything is possible. Like, yeah, I could write like the next Great Gatsby, or I could like be published in the New Yorker. Like, I'm sure there's thousands of people who tried that out as well when they were younger. So I, yeah, back then I was like really pursuing that, and then like navigating the quote unquote real world after college. And because the economy was so bad, because like so many of my millennial friends were moving back in with their parents and just straight up unemployed while they had college degrees. I did some traveling. I went immediately to Breckenridge for the first winter, and that's where I live now. But that was like the first real world experience, was like kind of being a ski bum. And then, you know, buying these like how to write fiction books, how to be a storyteller, whatever, like the elements of fiction type stuff. And so I was doing that in the background with that idea, like in the back of my mind, like, okay, when you had this like awakening moment, you knew for sure you had to like be an artist some one way or the other. You had to dedicate your life to that. And it seemed so true and so sure at the moment. So that was kind of how I was pursuing it. Thinking that I could, like, I had this one story. Well, I lived in Breckenridge, and then I lived in Grand Teton National Park for a summer because it was like the same company that did the hotel, the same corporation that owned all the hotels in Breck owned the main hotel in the national park. So I got to like spend a summer like living in the park, working there. It was kind of it was kind of like summer camp for adults. And there were a lot of people like my age who also like just graduated college and were like these like seeing the world through rose-colored glasses, like dreamers, like travelers, you know, kind of like hopping around. And a good friend of mine was from Louisiana, and after that summer, I moved and roomed with him down in New Orleans. And that was like also, you know, trying to be like bohemian, like, oh, I'm gonna write stories and live in New Orleans and just be like kind of a vagabond. But that the experience of living down there, and I was down there in 2011 and 2012, so that was like right when Hurricane Katrina like was kind of like finally not corrected, but there was the conditions of Hurricane Katrina were like still there a little bit, but the city was kind of almost done recovering from that. Um, and living down there, like and trying to do like the fake bohemian life was pretty crazy and pretty intense. And as I mentioned, you know, I was learning about the esoteric. I was learning about spiritual things, and New Orleans has its own brand of spiritual things that includes like, you know, like voodoo and like crazy. It's a very creative, jazzy, like haunted place.
Right. Yeah.
So like, and that and all of this mixes in with creativity because it's the imagination that you're tapping into, and you're playing with your inner world. You're playing with your subconscious and your dreams, and what you see in your imagination is what you're trying to like turn into stories or music or paintings or whatever. But like going like kind of like getting a crash course in that space in New Orleans was like really intense and scary and kind of messed up. That New Orleans as a place is a really light and dark place. So while I was like, it went really quick from being like idealistic, fake bohemian, I'm going to be a New Yorker author, to like, am I going insane right now? Like, it was like, there was like paranormal stuff happening. There was a lot of just like really intense stuff going on. And keep in mind too, this is like part of the process of like the PTSD. Like I've been sorting out everything from that kind of accident for years. And that's kind of all of that kind of just led me to where I am now. But back then it was like just dipping your toes into like the imagination and spirituality and art in a way that was like, it really kind of shook me. So, but also at that time, as I was saying, I wanted to be a fiction writer. I wanted to write. I wanted to use my English literature degree or whatever. And the experiences down there kind of became this story that I started working on after I left there. I moved back home in with my parents in 2012, like in the summer of 2012, and was like, all right, I'm going to get a real job. So I literally got like an office job working for a title company downtown with literally like, it was an office job downtown, commute, doing paperwork. And I was still kind of like shooketh from everything that happened in that little like adventurous period. So I was like doing the conventional job and then going to coffee shops and like trying to write this fiction type stuff. And the story that I was trying to conceive was like kind of based, it was kind of like it was a story about becoming an artist, becoming a musician, working in the service industry in this crazy New Orleans landscape. And it was kind of about that experience of like having the imagination hit you with inspiration, and how it kind of borders on insanity at certain points, and it can be terrifying at certain points. You can really like lose grip on reality when you just let the subconscious take over fully. And that's kind of, to me, related to spiritual things. It's related to archetypes or spirits or whatever. It's like the muse. Your show is called the Muse Memorandum.
Yeah.
And this it was kind of that story that I was trying to express, that was like what it's like to get hit by the muse. Because when you get hit by a muse, it is kind of like something totally external from you comes in, you embody it, and then it's your job to like turn it into something real. So like for me, it's most common with music. Like I'll be driving or something, and in my daydreaming, as you're trying to like hold on to the driving, or you're trying to hold on to the steering wheel and focus on the road, but your mind is so bored, your imagination is like keeping your mind busy, and then all of a sudden you're hearing music, or you're seeing a vision of like a story, a fictional story or whatever. So that's been my bread and butter ever since, is like the imaginal realm, and how the muse or any type of inspiration hits you, and then use the artist or the vessel for it, and it's your job to bring it into the world and share it, sort of. And how, I mean, it's really kind of like shamanic, because when you're in that mindset, you are you're not here, you're not like in reality, you're in la la land, but that's where ideas come from. It's almost like the fourth dimension or something. And this is like starting already to sound really woo woo, so I'm sort of exposing like how I ended up with
Totally
an
fine.
astrology podcast in the first place. But all of it from the beginning, like the theme was always like tying that in with art. How do like when the ideas arrive at you, um it's a certain type of person. You have to be a daydreamer, you have to be a little unhinged, you have to be a little bit like detached from reality, which who knows what made me that way. Like, does the near death experience of breaking my neck cause that, like, and you even hear about real near death experiencers who like die, they go to heaven or wherever, they go to the afterlife and come back, and then all of a sudden they have like psychic abilities, or they have these gifts or whatever. So like, and for me it's like, I don't know, I feel like the the imaginal realm is somewhere between here and where like God is. So all of these experiences to me are like about God. They're about like having a soul, having a reason for being here, incarnated. And for me, like for so long, it's been like, yeah, that was like the realization that I had. Like I am here to do art, to use my imagination to do all this stuff. And it honestly sucks a lot of the time, because the world is not carved out for artistic thinking, or like the Matrix or whatever. The normie world has had such a pull on my life. Like I said, I got a degree in economics to prove that I could do this. I've had office jobs, I've had all these different professional jobs on the one hand, because like like I don't have the in many situations I don't have the balls to be like, a full artist, fully dedicated. I'm like, no, 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 that's too risky. That's too weird. I need to put food on the table. I need to provide whatever. And so that's like a theme of what's been going on with me is like getting scared and then signing up for another office job or signing up for, I mean, I've been like a real estate agent. I've had my real estate license. And I'm pretty decent at surviving and thriving in the normie world, in the office world or whatever. Um, but that side, like the side of you that needs to sort of fulfill the duty of being an artist always ends up winning. So honestly, to get back to like the stories I was telling of like trying to write this New Orleans story back in this was like the early 2010s, like basically 2012 to 2014, I was like really trying to like complete this fiction thing. And then around 2014, I had this like spiritual, like strong gut urge, like I've got to do this now. I've got to do this now. And the thing that the urge was pulling me towards was, for some reason, had no logic to it, but to do Second City in Chicago, to take classes there, and to take guitar lessons at Old Town School of Folk, because like in the time that I was trying to like write this fiction, I would be like, all right, I'm taking a break and like noodle around on the guitar and just learn very basic guitar. And I as a kid, learned basic piano. I was not like very advanced, but from a really young age, I could read music and play keys. So like I was messing around on the keyboard and stuff. And so that period, like kind of like 2014 to 2016, I was pursuing improv and taking guitar lessons to just like, again, it was like this strong blissful urge, like pulling me, like this feels so good, this is where it's at, I'm just doing it now. And I like got on the computer and signed up for the classes. So that happened, and then slowly a lot of the storytelling and like plot and structure and character and theme, all these things that I was kind of trying to learn about to do fiction, started transforming into like getting ideas for songs. And I was learning folk guitar pretty easy. You can write 2 chord songs that are radio hits. You can like, I was learning like what they call the cowboy chords on the guitar, just like open strings, very easy to play. The minute I could play like the basic cowboy chords, I was getting song ideas. And then so like I changed into like a folk songwriter really, really quickly, and enjoyed it a lot more than trying to be a fiction writer. And funny enough, like the world and our attention spans have been changing this whole time too. And so, you know, my 2010 brain had the attention span to read books way more. And now by now, like I'll fully admit it, I don't really read a lot. We've like technology and social media and all of this has changed so much. And it's like, I hope that books, fiction and books and writing make a comeback, but like I'll be the first to admit that it's like a medium that I'm not as interested in this world. Like I'd rather write music, I'd rather do bite-size creative stuff. So like yeah, and at that time like improv too is super awesome. Like Second City, if people don't know, it's like the improv comedy institution that's been around since like the 70s or 60s or something, and was kind of like the place where a lot of SNL people were educated in the art of like improv comedy. And you basically get in there and have, like, if you wanted to, you would take like improv 1, and it would be like at maybe 8 weeks, once a week, with like a group of people in your class, and then you could continue on week after week with the same group if everybody kept signing up for the same like succession of courses. And I just had like an awesome group of really funny, different people that, and I'm from Chicago. So I was living in the city with everybody that I grew up with who is not into this stuff at all. And so Second City, that like crew of people around like 2014, 15, whatever, became like a really new group of friends. And it literally kind of prepared me to be comfortable on stage as a musician in a weird way. Like, I don't even know the logic of it, but improv is basically like you come up with these like fake situations or fake stories, and then they'll just be like, all right, you're in the grocery store, this person is doing this, like, go. And you'll have to like make up stuff, and you'll be like acting on the fly. And it literally kind of like, I feel this way, that it kind of like rewired my brain in a weird way to like just be like always just be open and ready to like bounce something back, like the things, the tagline, or the thing that you always say in improv is yes and. So it'll be like, all right, we're at the pool, and yes, we're at the pool, and like the pool is drained, where'd the water go, and there's a crazy person over there. That's really bad.
You just build on it. Yeah.
Yeah, so that I really do recommend people get into that. And then like the to be critical about that whole world as well. You're paying for classes, it's an institution. There's hundreds of people that are never going to be famous who are like being sold the idea that if you take improv classes you can be funny. So there is that kind of cringe element. And I'll be totally frank, like this was when like I feel like comedy as a whole has been really like affected by, I guess, what you would call like cancel culture or politically correct culture. And literally when I started, it was like on the horizon. And then when I was done, the sense was literally like, check your privilege, straight white male, like go, like fuck you. Yeah. So like that turned me off big time. But like, yeah, I was doing that and taking guitar lessons at the Old Town School of Folk. So there are like these two institutions in Chicago. Old Town School of Folk is great too, because it's like affordable group classes. I was like one of the youngest people there. It was a lot of boomers. And you basically just, it was almost on the same schedule as Second City, like 8 weeks. You pay a fee, you're in a group class, and you start with like guitar 1, guitar 2, whatever, and you kind of advance. And I did the same thing at both of those schools. I just like, I had a full-time job. This is like another funny side note. Like, I was working for this company that bought foreclosed homes and flipped them and rented them out. And that, talk about improv, that job was like every day was a new thing. There would be an auction in the morning for a foreclosed home, and they would like send me out and be like, all right, drive out to like Joliet this morning, take pictures and tell us the condition of the home, should we buy it at the auction or whatever. Then in the evening they might be, or then later in the day they might be like, all right, drive an hour and a half to Waukegan, like the total opposite end of the map. And that was an intense job in itself, because that was like a dirty job. I was dealing with, it was sad because people were being evicted. I did evictions, but I was like spending a lot of time alone, driving, like I said, opening up the imagination even more. And I loved it. But all of this was happening like in the 2010s, which even now it's 2023. Like I'm starting to become nostalgic for that decade too, because it's crazy how fast time goes. But like there was so much has changed in the past 10 years, like drastically. So like, yeah, when I was doing all of that, it was really ripe for like budding creativity, like lots of alone time, lots of imagination, taking classes in improv, taking classes in music. And like I said, all of like I was learning about spirituality, learning about esoteric stuff, learning about astrology, hermeticism, meditation. I was doing meditation and yoga all the time. And yoga and meditation, all that spiritual stuff was also becoming super mainstream. So it was like I was really like riding the edge of like really going deep and really pushing the boundaries, but it was also a little chaotic because like I was making okay money, enough to pay my rent, enough to live in the city, like, and the neighborhoods I was in was like Wicker Park first, then the West Loop, like before Google opened in the West Loop, and then all of a sudden the West Loop is like bougie, and then I'm off to Logan Square. um but like all that was happening, and then so as I was, like I said, I was able to kind of play the cowboy chords on guitar, listening to tons of podcasts too behind the wheel. Like that's how I became a podcaster, because I was like doing that. I did that job for about 3 years, learning literally every random suburb, like from rural to right outside the city to nice to really ghetto, every neighborhood within the city. Like every day was like a crash course in sort of learning the city itself, which was cool. So like I feel like more than your average person, like I know every little nook and cranny of Chicago. So Chicago is like a really special place to me too because of this time. um but then kind of by the time that I was sort of like being rejected from like the Second City crowd, or the Second City conservatory, like Second City had a conservatory and I made it in the first time, and then they do like a second round, and then I like got rejected from that and was like, do I really want to like pursue improv or like what am I doing here? So I sort of like dropped that. I began taking like private lessons at Old Town School that kind of taught me to sing and play guitar. And I was doing, like I said, working these jobs, and then all these song ideas were hitting me behind almost always behind the wheel of the car. And I was like learning how to write music from what was coming out of these like car ride daydreams. And then I would take the music and work it out with my teacher in the guitar lessons. And again, down the rabbit hole in all of the podcasts that were like really fringe and really either about like esoteric things or conspiracy things. So like in retrospect, it was all so exciting and cool and kind of like made me who I am today. But even at the time though, throughout all of that, like as as with any artist, maybe not any artist, but I feel like a common thing for artists is like the mental health struggle. Like if you are that type of person who can feel all the things and contemplate like on such a regular basis, and contemplate and be alone and solitary and random, like driving around Chicagoland, like with my thoughts or with these podcasts or with whatever it was. Like there were definitely some lows. And that's also how like these spiritual things like meditation or going to therapy. I was in and out of therapy during this period too, because I was like at certain times like really hitting low lows and high highs or whatever, inspired, or just like feeling nothing. And the main thing was like questioning always, like, why don't, like, I'm a millennial, why don't I have a good job yet? Why am I not a, like, I'm not being a good boy by like working in an office and like jumping through these hoops. It was like all of this intense personal experience was kind of like pulling me away from that. And I would be like back and forth of like trying to be normal and not necessarily giving up on creative things, but just being like, what, like, I would feel like a crazy person. Like, what the hell am I even doing right now? Like, I'm living paycheck to paycheck. And do I even want to be famous, or like, what is even the goal here? So like this whole period, I guess, of like the 2010s for me was kind of like really necessary and intense, and just kind of like giving me the lived experience of like spiritual and mental health things, so that I wouldn't be depressed, or so that I wouldn't be, unhealthy, and dealing with like sort of my nature of having a wild imagination and wanting to turn these ideas into real things. And then also just like all of the societal pressure or family expectations to like be a normie. Like, that's enough to make you go crazy or make you feel crazy.
Totally.
So like all that was like going on. And long story short, like towards the end of that time, like 2016 to 2019, you know, Donald Trump became the president. I was like after going to these schools, like the Old Town School for Music and Second City for improv and comedy, I started becoming like an open mic rat and like going to all these open mics, and I became part of this like scene in Chicago that was super inspiring in so many ways, because I would just call it like the DIY scene. And this is where like a lot of really, like I said, I grew up in the burbs. I was living in a city where I had a social life of all my original friends who had the original normie perspective of what you should be doing at a certain age. And the alternative was like all of these artistic people who were like so different from me, different backgrounds, different stories, and all of this stuff. And it was a very like sort of like I don't want to say multicultural, but like the scene was really inspiring for me. Just about like, there would be like hip hop people, there would be punk people, there would be folk people like me. Like I was one of the folk people. There would be comedians. There would be like really seemingly like avant-garde people, and really like when I say DIY, there would be these like DIY houses where people would be like in an artist collective, like living in a house that would have a name or something, or like a brand. And they would be like, oh yeah, I live at, like, some, I'm just going to throw out some random names, like, oh, I live at the Dojo, I live at Euphoria, I live at Rut Corp. There were these like places. And like back then I was like, this is so freaking cool. Like, this is like the dream. This is like real art stuff. And it really had this like Renaissance vibe, because at these events, they would be featuring like, it's some people might find this cringe, but there would be like poetry or like spoken word, and then like a DJ, and then like a folk person, and then there would be like painters who would have their stuff in the gallery. And so it was like mixing all of these different mediums, and it was a lot of like art school people. And I didn't go to school for art, but like in the beginning I was like really inspired by it. And one other place that I'll shout out at this time that really like gave me confidence and made me feel like a part of something was this thing called the shithole, which was primarily comedy. It was kind of like an underground pop-up comedy thing. And like I said, this is like I started doing this like 2016 to 2019, and literally have mad love for the shithole and the guys that started it. But it would be like on Instagram, there would just be like a flyer with kind of like a spooky secret society vibe. It would be like shithole tonight, message for details. And I literally messaged for details. I was like, I DM'd him on Instagram and I was like, where do I go to this? And it was like so cool. And it was like this, it was the shithole was basically like 2 acts where it was like mostly stand-up comedy, a little bit of improv, and a little bit of like really wacky like improvisational stuff. But at the end, there would always be one musician of the first set who would play one song, and they would close out the first set. And then the second set, there would be one musician who would play 1 or 2 songs too, and close out that. So it was like 80% comedy and improv and like 20% music. And I like would just start going to these shows and meeting people, meeting comedians, some of whom are like famous now actually. And it was like, yeah, I got tagged in the shithole post, and then they started having me perform my stuff there. So like that just like gave me more confidence. Like I'm a part of this scene. I'm a part of this community. This is real and this is actually cool. And like everything else that was a part of this like DIY scene, it was blending different mediums. It was blending comedy and music and painting, and like everybody that you would meet there, it had like a very like punk, um eclectic underground vibe, indie vibe. And so I just ate that up. And so like I don't know, maybe I should stop. I don't know if I'm just rambling too much, but I'm
No,
like,
it's great. It's great.
yeah,
You
so like,
actually answered a lot of the questions I had already, so it's good
yeah.
that way. But I can see where you would feel like going back to a little earlier, you were talking about just having this kind of normie life situation with the real estate stuff and the office job and all that. I could totally relate to that because I grew up in the burbs and ended up going to the city where everybody, you know, I lived closer to New York City, and I always felt like I had to like I was living double lives all the time.
Yeah.
Because of you've got to do it this way, straight and narrow, office job, you got to have a career and all that stuff. But there was always a side of me like you where all of the dreams and the drawing, and I've got to pick up everything creative that I can possibly find as a kid, and so it's always in you, and you have this tug of war going on. Some people never get over that, so I think it's really
I'm not over it. Yeah.
fantastic that you've been able to at least you know, with all these different life experiences and the accident and all of that, you've been able to, you say you're not over it yet, and I get that. There's parts of me that are still kind of like that, but you at least were able to kind of streamline stuff together more to be your authentic self and to really like launch off with your creative endeavors. So I'm just relating to it.
Yeah, and it's like yeah, and at the time, so like it was really inspiring. Like I said, I have mad love for all of those old friends from that world in Chicago. You know, like there are certain people that straight up like made me feel like like I was a real artist, or I just saw people sort of humbly being real artists themselves, and I was sort of using them as the template. Like they can do it, so now I can do it. And like specifically with like the shithole, I mean, the name of it is the shithole, so it's like it has that edge. And even the post, and like I said, I was learning about deep esoteric mysteries too, because that's my personality, and that's like the experience of like the neck injury, near death, God experience. Like, oh God, like life is actually precious. We don't know when we're going to die. And like, there's more beyond this life. So if we're here, what are we going to do? We have to live life to the fullest.
Right.
Like that, just like perspective. I was blending all these ideas. I was learning about astrology, learning the zodiac, learning the archetypes and the planets. And like, there was a parallel in creativity because like, the archetypes come out in your songs or stories or visuals or whatever. So like all of it was intermingling, but also I really started learning astrology during my Saturn return, which was 2015 to the end of 2017, I think. And that's like when I really like learned enough to do astrology. And the thing about astrology is you get a sense of what's on the horizon. And the closer and closer we got to 2020, the more I was like, we're about to, there's about to be a big change in everything. So like, even though like, and also from 2015 to 2019, the morale of artists and creatives was going down because nobody liked the fact that Donald Trump was the president. Political thing, everything was becoming more and more politicized.
Right. And polarized. Yeah.
Comedy, music, and the arts was becoming politicized and polarized. Cancel culture and the fear of like that was taking over. And I didn't like that. I didn't want to be a part of it. And like I said, many of these individuals who were a part of this scene, I have mad love and mad respect for. But as a whole, most of them were going along with that wave. And I didn't like it. I saw it for what it was. I saw that it was sort of destructive and witch hunt like. And like,
Yeah.
I wasn't really worried about being canceled per se, but I could see the like frenzy. Like there were a lot of like rock punk guys who were being accused of things, and you just see the mob come after them, or there would be things like related to race. And this scene that I was a part of was very mixed race. Like there were people of all different backgrounds. So like you couldn't avoid the reality of race, I guess, but you could just see the kind of like crazy, like riled up reaction to political things. Like, and people wanted to express that in their comedy and their art and their whatever.
Right. Yeah.
And it's not that I like couldn't handle it or like totally disagreed with it, but I was just like, this isn't really like there's something in the collective going on that is making me not resonate with this scene as a whole anymore. The individuals, absolutely, I still love them and still like am inspired by them, but as a whole I was like, something is off about this time. And it was like comedy, there were still great comedians who I saw in those years, but there were also a lot of crappy ones talking about politics rather than like real, just funny, like and laugh. It's like, can I laugh at this? And it was that idea of like censorship. So like all that was happening, and I was at the time going deep into these podcasts about esoteric things, astrology, conspiracy. At the time, too, I met, who is in part of this world, I met my future podcast co-host Scarlett Ravenswood, who just like when we're talking about edginess and alternative and like fringe, like she was about as fringe as you could get to me because she was into like Wicca and paganism and that kind of spirituality. So like we connected, and me and her were like bouncing ideas, and she was like a really key part of that time for me too. And we later ended up just forming a podcast. It was so random. We were like, what if we just had a podcast? Yeah, like it unfolded so quickly, and then suddenly at the end of 2018, very end, like we started on the winter solstice 2018. I was doing a weekly podcast, and um at the time too, like I was a solo musician. I was a solo musician, solo painter. I sent you some of the paintings I did over these years. And again, that was all part of that like multidisciplinary vibe where it's like, oh, I can do folk here, folk music solo at the shithole. And then I could try to get my paintings hung at this DIY party or whatever. So like it was cool. It really was like I was doing all the things. In retrospect at the time, at certain points I was like, look at this, look how many followers I have. Like I'm not making money on this. I'm just like dedicating my life to these artistic hobbies. They're going nowhere. But like I really was kind of like when you asked me to like send you a bio, and I was like finally like going back and looking at everything, I was like, I actually did a lot of shit back then.
You
But
did.
at the time it doesn't really seem like that big of a deal. But and I'm glad that I'm really excited that you invited me on here because if you can't tell, I like talking about this. But like it also made me think like I should like throw together a website and just like put all of this stuff on there, because even to just see what I was doing in those years, I you'd have to like Instagram stalk me and like scroll through a bunch of
Yeah.
BS to like see everything. So this conversation is giving me more confidence that that was worth it or that was valuable. But like I said, with that back and forth of normie versus like artists, whatever, there's so much doubt and there's so much self-sabotage that
Right.
at this time, I'm 36 now. I'm like pretty much working full time as a musician, like paying the bills, steady, stable with it. And now I can kind of breathe a sigh of relief. But like for over a decade, or I guess for a full decade, if you count like 2013 to 2023, it took a full decade to like get there. And it's fun to talk about this. But to get back to when I started the Cosmic Keys podcast, it was with Scarlett. She was on board. Like she had an art history degree, and she was like on the same page with like this world I was into. But she was also like internet famous, like Instagram witch, you could say. She was doing like how to cast spells and all this stuff. And this for me was like so taboo, but I was like, fuck yeah, also. Like I was super interested in it because it was like from this whole period I'm talking about, like my perspective was different. My perspective was like, we're in this fake matrix world. All of this regular normie stuff is at the end of the day bullshit. Spirituality is valuable. The unseen world is real, and art can be a like way to integrate all of it together. So like me and her were I'll get to the 2019 was actually a really interesting year too, because that was in Chicago when I sort of went all in on the artist life and sort of didn't really succeed. But I know you live close to kind of the area where I was spending my time. I found this I was renting in Rogers Park for a little while, and I loved that neighborhood. It was really inspired by that particular part of the city, just like being near the lake, and the vibes there are like so. That's one of my favorite places ever. Is like that
That's
part
where I
of the
am.
city, and even just like that little liminal space between Rogers Park and Evanston where you go along the lake around that cemetery. It's like something up there is like really strong. I don't know how to put it, but for 2019, I found this like coach house in Evanston. So it was like kind of far out. Evanston isn't really super close to most of the, like, it's just directly north of the city. It's where Northwestern University is. And I found this coach house that was like in this old house, beautiful old neighborhood that the house was probably built in the 1800s. It was like a coach house with literally like a wood burning stove. And it was like this little space that was advertised on Craigslist literally as an art studio. And it was like $300 a month. And then I went like full, I'm painting in here, I'm recording my music in here. I had an apartment in Rogers Park, which is like 15, 20 minutes away. But I'll confess, at this time, because I didn't have a lot of money, I started like squatting in the art studio. So I shared with you the 2 songs I recorded at the time and made music videos for. One was called Old Chicago Cold, and the other is called Wake Me. And you'll actually see the little shack at the little coach house in the Wake Me music video.
Oh, I'm definitely going to watch again now.
And after watching that video again, this is going to be like a side tangent. But like I said, I was really into astrology. I was podcasting for the first time as an astrologer, like giving weekly forecasts. And I had this schizo. I had this schizo concept album that was 12 songs for the 12 signs of the zodiac, and it like went through. I didn't realize at the time that was like way too overly ambitious to like just do on my own. But the video for Wake Me has Aries symbolism in it. The zodiac sign Aries, which is like a fire sign, the ram. But looking back at Wake Me, that video is so like kind of all over the place and kind of, I'm not super proud of it, but like I said, there's scenes from Evanston, and there's like Scarlett filmed the scenes where there are actual like farm animal rams that I'm with. But it would have made sense if I did the 12 Zodiac concept album, but I couldn't even get through like 3 songs because I just was like in over my head. So that's like sort of a side fail story about like failed ideas that you weren't able to bring into fruition. But yeah, like I said, I got rid of the Rogers Park apartment and was like squatting in this art studio and like showering at LA Fitness. And like at moments I was like, this is the dream. Like this is the best ever. And then at other times I was like, what the fuck am I doing with my life right now? But it was at that time where I was in that studio that I put a podcast out every week. Not only that, but I had like a synthesizer, and I was making like original interlude music for every episode, and it was great. Like I loved it. But like I said, more and more and more and more, I was seeing the scene as very political and actually kind of like politically extreme, if you ask me. I met some people who were sort of like card carrying communists, and it's not like everybody was that, but that was kind of a wake up call for me that I was like, something's just off about all of this. And if I continue like investing a lot of my time and energy into this, like I wouldn't be myself, because I don't agree with these things. I love all the people individually, but like I'm not on board with communism, socialism, whatever, like radical feminism or whatever like these things are. And they all, the funny thing is everybody talks about woke today. Like this stuff is woke, but nobody knew it woke. This was before it was mainstream. I was the only like I knew about pronouns and stuff like that before anybody did. And back then I didn't really care, and I still don't really care, but like it was not what it is today, but I didn't resonate with it, and I was like, all right, so I got my hometown friends who I feel are just putting me in a box of normie, what I should be, and I'm keeping up with them, and I feel insecure around them because I'm so different, even though I love them. My hometown friends have this version of life. Then the artistic friends were woke. So I was like, I don't fit in either of these boxes, and this kind of sucks. Here I am squatting in an art studio in Evanston, podcasting and DIY recording and making weird music videos. And like by the fall of 2019, I sort of hit a rock bottom, and just in a knee jerk, like again, spiritual intuition type of way, was like, oh, I got to go back to Colorado. Like I got to just start over and like go back to Colorado. And there was a lot of like synchronicity and also the astrological stuff that I knew about. I had the idea that 2020 was going to be the end of the world, and it was. Like the astrology paid off. I made a life-changing decision based on astrology because in January of 2020, there was a bunch of crazy shit happening with the stars. If people know about that type of stuff,
Yeah, I recall.
it was like Pluto, Saturn, there was eclipses, and then at the end of the year, it was Saturn and Jupiter entering Aquarius. That, and which is, this is probably like a different language to most people, but long story short, I was freaked out about what was going to happen. And I have several normie friends who knew that I was into this stuff, that can verify that I was like, yeah, I'm into astrology and stuff. Like 2020 is going to be basically the end of the world. So I'm moving to the Rocky Mountains. And so I did that. I kept podcasting with Scarlett, and then suddenly, like, it was like, whoa, we're like in the trenches. This is like a historic event, and we're podcasting. So like, podcasting had like a whole new excitement to it because you were just like in the trenches talking about crazy world events. So that was really fun. And I mean, Breckenridge, where I lived and where I moved to, like when I arrived, it was just like whew, like nature, snowboarding, like tourism, like it's vacation land. Everybody's happy, and it was like 2020 was like one of the best years of my life, and um, all of that was happening, and honestly, towards the end of my time in Chicago in 2019. I wasn't really going out and performing a lot. I was hoping that if I do this DIY home recording and music video stuff, I can like get fans on the internet maybe. But I wasn't like performing because like I said, I felt like kind of a toxicity in the scene that I was just like, I'm kind of over it. I can't really get on board and virtue signal and be political and pretend to have values that I don't actually have.
Right.
So when I came to Colorado, like nobody was political. Like I hate to say it, but like everybody's just kind of like free spirited, outdoor, hippie, kind of not dumb, but just like we don't need to talk about these things because we live in a small mountain town and everybody's kind of the same. And coming from an urban creative community where everybody was so vastly different and that was cool in its own way, this was like the opposite, where it's like everybody's like into the same genre of music, which happens to be my genre. Like people like acoustic music up here, whereas like in Chicago it'd be like, oh, here comes a white dude with an acoustic guitar, like boring, like check the privilege or whatever it is. Colorado people are like way easier to impress, I'll say that. And I met my future bandmate Nate at an open mic in January of 2020 when I was like first getting into all this. But keep in mind, I thought something was going to go down in 2020. I'd moved because of that reason. And I remember I was working at a hotel. When I first arrived, I got a job as a bellman at a hotel, and was like in charge. It was my job to like drop the New York Times at people's like hotel door if they wanted a copy for the day. And I was seeing the front page headlines, and I was like, "Oh God, they're talking about this virus. What is coming?" And I was like, "This is bullshit. Like, there's something off about this." And my conspiracy brain was like really ready to disagree with the narrative that. But so all of that happened, and like um the lockdowns happened. I got fired or laid off from that job. And like I said, 2020 was one of my favorite years ever because like, we were locked down, but I was just like taking walks in nature and again, getting really introspective, doing more spiritual type stuff and having more kind of like epiphanies and inspiration. And it was hard at certain times too. I had like random flare-ups of like mental health and depression stuff come up then too, which I'm sure a lot of people did. But even at that point, and even to this day, it's like, all right, been there, done that. I've got these tools in my toolkit. Maybe it's astrology, maybe it's meditation, maybe it's like journaling or therapy, whatever. But if you've been depressed enough times, you kind of learn how to get
Right.
yourself out of it quicker
Yeah.
with more ease. So like that was happening. And then in 2020, we my bandmate Nate and I, like I remember I got this house painting job in the late spring, like and this was the summer that the George Floyd riots were happening. And I was already skeptical of the identity politics and the political activism. So I wasn't really into that stuff either after sort of like living amongst it in Chicago and seeing the toxicity of it. And I'll go out on a limb and say that those things were toxic. People were just destroying black neighborhoods and just throwing a fit because they were locked down for 3 months and then they were just let loose and it was just like chaos. So like all this was happening. I remember I got a house painting job, and it's kind of a fateful thing because I really didn't. I was like, I want to work. I want money, and I'm like a good little normie. Like I want a paycheck. And so I worked there for like about a month. And then one day randomly, the guy was like, Dan, we don't think painting is for you. And I was like, and was really pissed about that. But then I was once again unemployed during this COVID madness. And me and my bandmate, Nate, future bandmate, like we reconnected that summer and just started going to all these open mics. Like they had these open mics that you would have to wear a mask maybe at the time. And like everything was like outdoors and everything was like weirdly altered, but like it was sort of open. And we would go to like 3 open mics a week and I was just back at it, back performing way more than I was in Chicago because I was like over it in Chicago in 2019. And then suddenly it was like, we're out here, we're doing this is fun. And then we started gigging solo shows and we were like making a few bucks here and there. And at a certain point, funny story too, to get into the origin of Moonstone Quill. And again, I want to stop if I'm rambling too much because I'm
You're fine. It's good.
so like I ended up moving into Nate's house, which is on Moonstone Road in Breckenridge, which is where we got the name Moonstone Quill from. Um, it was this awesome kind of like 80s forest house, not necessarily luxurious. It was kind of like a college house, but like great location. It was just old and kind of like it was kind of a party house. But I moved in and I got finally another big boy job. I started doing property management. at that point. And I would end up doing that for like 2 more years, full-time salary, like getting a good amount of money for what you can make in a ski town, like professional, while doing this band stuff on the side. But I remember I was like, oh, I got some money now. And I was like jonesing on Facebook Marketplace. And one day I had, like, when I talk about the spiritual intuition or just like fateful synchronistic things, like I had the most gut feeling like I need to buy this mandolin, this PA system, and this digital camera from Colorado Springs, Colorado now. And so like I and Nate saw I left at like 5 o'clock to drive to Colorado Springs. He's like, what are you doing? I was like, don't ask any questions. I just gotta do this. And I had this like burning desire to get a mandolin for myself. Me and Nate both play acoustic guitar, or he plays acoustic and electric, whatever. But I was like, I need to buy a mandolin now, and drove all the way to Colorado Springs, got 3 really good deals on a mandolin, a PA, and a digital camera, and then came back and went to work the next day because I had this big boy job, and Nate was collecting checks because it was COVID, so he had lots of time. He picked up my mandolin that I had just bought and was like, oh wow, this is so easy to play. And he started playing mandolin then and there. And within like a week, he could play basic mandolin because he's really musical. And then he's like, let's start a band. And we started a band like very shortly thereafter. And this was still like COVID. This was 2020. And we started it with a violin player, with another guitar player, and with me on like rhythm guitar and vocals, and Nate on mandolin and vocals. And we were like, what do we call it? We were like, something with Moonstone, because Moonstone is the street we're on. It's a cool street name.
It's a street. Wow.
Yeah. So and then we were like, Moonstone. It sounds like moonshine, and we're like a bluegrass sounding band. So we're like, how about Moonstone still, like moonshine still. And then I was like, no, that's too many S's. That like doesn't really roll off the tongue. And then our other bandmate was like, how about Moonstone Quill? Like a quill you write with. We were like, all right, cool, whatever. We're Moonstone Quill. And yeah, since then, we got cut off a little bit in between the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021 when they like re-locked us down. But then from like St. Patrick's Day of 2021 forward, we just like played and played and played, and it was really easy. There was no gatekeeping because like we're in a tourist town. This is the genre that people want to hear in the mountains, which I just happened to know from like the Old Town School of Folk. So it was it's not to say I couldn't have formed a bluegrass band in Chicago, but it was just so easy to do here.
Yeah, it seems like a much better environment for that. And it just seems healthier for you overall, just with the nature and the easygoing, free-thinking attitudes and the appreciation of the acoustic and all of that.
Yeah, for sure. So we've been going at that for a while. I podcasted a lot this whole time too, and Scarlett left the show in the fall of 2020 when I was talking about COVID in a way that was like not safe. So there's no hard feelings. I don't necessarily blame her because she had like a big following on her YouTube channel. She was making money from this. She didn't want to get canceled, and I'm not even saying that's why she left. She might have just been like, Dan's crazy. I don't anymore. But I assume it was because of that. And yeah, I've been doing astrology ever since, but honestly, I'll probably wrap up this rambling in 2022. 2022 was like I said, I thought 2021 was one of the best years ever. Or I'm sorry, 2020. 2020 was one of the best years ever. It was like the first year in Breck. COVID happened. It was like I started the band. Everything was great. 2021, I was full time property managing, like hotels or like Airbnb style, full time job, full time commitment. Immediately after work, we would just play gigs. We didn't really practice. We would just show up and play. I played like hundreds of shows over these past 2 years. So like super blessed that I got to do that with this band, you know. And then in 2022, there was some more difficulty because I was like I was podcasting, working full time, and playing music full time. And the work part of the property management got hit such a stress point because property management in vacation rentals is really stressful. And I was like, I gotta quit this. So I quit and moved to Denver from May of 2022 to basically March of 2023. And that whole period in Denver could have been like a dark night of the soul because I didn't like the city of Denver. It made me really miss Chicago. I was like, Chicago to me, and I don't mean to be rude, but I was like, I freaking love city living in a city like Chicago. And Denver just fell short. I didn't really try to make friends there. I was just living there and driving up the hour and a half drive from Denver to Breckenridge every weekend to play up here in Breckenridge. But it was like, well, I can only live in Denver, or I can't live in Breckenridge because that would mean I would have to get a day job. So now I live in Denver because I'm more poor again. So like that time there was like, not only that happened, but there was we had multiple band members leave the lineup, which threw me off big time. Like, cause you like build a bond with your bandmates, and then when someone decides to leave, it made me really angry. It made me upset and angry and doubtful.
Well, I can imagine it would throw off the whole balance of the band too.
Yeah. And it caused more infighting between the remaining members. So that was like a true test of like our band basically, and mainly the relationship between me and Nate. We're kind of like the two main people of the band, and it's crazy. This is kind of like a whole nother topic, but like most of the artistic stuff that I was describing earlier is like stuff you do alone, and being solitary was like the key to it. I was getting the ideas by myself. So it was all on me, and I didn't need anybody else's approval. I didn't need any other collaboration. Nobody else was in it but me. But then when you're in a band, it's like it's I've heard other musicians describe it like it's the most not it's not a romantic relationship when I say intimacy, but the intimacy that you're dealing with is like nothing else you ever really do, because you have to like wear your heart on your sleeve when you're on stage, and you have to do it in sync with other people who are also putting themselves out there in a vulnerable position. And so when you're doing this, and you might be a control freak like me, you take things really personally. And then also it just exposes like how sort of hateful you can be to other people. It's fucked up to say, but like that was like a true lesson in 2022 when all of this was going on with the band and I was living in Denver. Basically miserable, but like I said, I was a pro at not being depressed by this point at 35. So I was fine, but it could have been really bad, I would say. It was like not key. But after I like saw that was happening, the band was really tested, and I was truly ready to quit at certain points. And then like towards the end of the winter, I got the opportunity to move back to Breckenridge in this great house that I'm at right now. And then everything started sorting itself back out and everything got better. And I was really close to getting another big boy job doing property management or hotels again.
Mm-hmm.
But in the interviews, I was very upfront. I'm like, hey, you ever heard of this band? Yeah, I'm in it. We're kind of a big deal in this little town. I'm just going to need Friday and Saturday nights off. Nobody would hire me when I said that. So that funny enough, at 35 years old, I entered the service industry for the first time and became a busser at a restaurant and a bar back at a bar, with the condition that I can take off basically whenever I want. So that's like another interesting subject when we're talking about art and like the keeping the bills paid thing is like, I wish I would have done that years ago. I wish I would have like entered the restaurant or bar industry years ago, because it would have been way better to really not have to squat in an art studio, so like that happened this year. And by now I'm barely working those jobs and really full time making enough money to like live in Breck, which is not cheap, and just do this. And now it's funny that we're talking about this now. Like finally I'm like, okay, now all of that sort of like insecurity and thinking like, oh my God, I am a starving artist, or I need a big boy job or whatever. Like it's today, as of like the past month or two, it's like, okay, now this is a big boy job. Finally, like it's finally a big boy job. Here I go. Now, how do I keep doing this until I'm 75 years old? There are 65-year-old musicians out there. And so it's pretty wild, but that's basically my whole artistic life that I just rambled at you. So hopefully that wasn't random or cringy, but
no, it was fantastic. It was a good cohesive timeline. So, and it's good that you were able to get that flexibility with the restaurant industry jobs, to sort of finally segue into doing it as a full-time thing, doing your music. And I think, although I was thinking about what you were talking about before, how you really just kind of steered away from the literature and writing, wanting to do the stories and all that. But I thought, well, you're able to tell those stories if you're writing songs, and
mm-hmm.
The folk music, the bluegrass and all that sort of lends itself to storytelling and that kind of creativity.
Yeah, it was wild because like I had this like at that time, like fresh out of college, with pretty frazzled from breaking my neck and like trying to enter the real world during that recession time.
Right.
Like I was doing whatever it took to like imprint that in my mind. And this was like a less technological time too. And I remember I got this book or audiobook or something that was like how to be an artist or something like that. And it was like really emphasizing notebook writing and like always keeping like a little moleskin in your pocket, like that to be like so artsy. But like I'm getting more back into that these days, like pen to paper. But I would literally like, just to like do something productive, I would like transcribe, I would take notes like furiously out of these like fiction writing books. And I don't even know what was making me do stuff like that. But a lot, when we think about like your brain and the way you think and knowing the rules, knowing the structure of things, I was really trying to like nail down the structure and even just learning about like mythology and a lot of books that were sort of like Joseph Campbell, like The Hero's Journey. I mean, that was like the starting point, and that was fresh out of college with an overpriced degree in literature, which was like,
Right.
you know, some people might be like, that was the biggest waste of a degree, but it's like, yeah, it was expensive, and yeah, there are probably different ways to learn that stuff in today's world, but like that was the conventional route. Like pick a topic, pick a subject. Like
Right.
you
Yeah.
want biology, are you good at English, or are you good at math? And now I do think a lot of that is irrelevant and is being thrown out the window because we don't really need it the structures are changing today. But yeah, I was like, well, I know I need to be an artist and I just got this degree. I might as well like keep working on this. But when the time was right, it just like the writing just turned into songwriting, and it was like way more um instant. Like when you hear a song, and also like when I hear these songs in my head, they usually come through as like gibberishy, and it's like, all right, I know the vowels. I know it's like or something like that. And then you're like, what are the words that are going to make this the way this sound, the way these vowels sound, the whatever like these notes and vowels are evoking. It makes you feel some type of way, even when it's gibberish. But then when you like make it a phrase, it just packs such a punch, and you're still like telling a story. And there is like a structure to music too. It's like verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, or something like that. Um, but it was way more fun. Like I was like super struggling to write these or to write fiction, and to like I was super self-critical, and like I would read it back to myself and be like, "Oh my God, like this dialogue like sounds so amateur or whatever." And you just I was small. I knew well enough that like I sounded like an overly optimistic English major that was no good, you know. But in songwriting, I was like, I feel some type of way from this tune. That's all that really matters, you know. You're not like creating an imaginary universe with fake characters and like fake dialogue and descriptions that are just supposed to hit. Like fiction writing is super hard, and I give props to anybody who's doing it these days. And I hope it's not like a lost art form, but like if I stuck to simply that, it probably wouldn't be till now that I'm 36 that I'm writing anything halfway decent, you know? And I don't know if that would have been so fun. Like the stuff I'm doing now is more fun, I think. So I don't know, maybe if I was like extra depressed and extra introverted, I would still be writing fiction, but it was more fun to like get up on stage and fuck around and sing and party and socialize with people.
Yeah, it sounds like you've been able to really just transmute a lot of things and come to a good kind of happy, joyous place with all of this. But I wanted to ask, did you feel like we're rounding out on the time, but did you feel like with all of these different experiences and the sort of the duality going on with the office job, day job, and the music and all of that, and all of the different types of jobs you've had, different experiences, did you feel some sense of people sort of judging you and thinking you might be just all over the place and that kind of thing? Because I feel like I'm still going with the question, but I've had in my life really similar experiences to what you've had not with music, but in other ways in the art scene, and juggling the normie world versus the art world and all that, and different jobs, like was an insurance agent in Manhattan and a high-end luxury furniture salesperson, and all these weird oddball things that I never would have pictured myself doing. And I always felt like, oh, everybody, there she goes again. She's doing this now, that kind of thing. Did you feel that kind of pressure and judgment from other people? And, well, go ahead and answer, and then I got one more.
Yeah, I would, to answer that, I would say I was my own worst critic, probably, than anybody like outwardly saying things to me that were critical.
Yeah, maybe it's the perception of other people.
It's all in my head.
Yeah.
It's not on anything. It's based on like my interpretation of of like our world, and like my interpretation of what my friends and family think. My friends and family, like, I don't know. I think I'll just be totally honest. I think like I don't get criticism. I think people are just more holding back about how they really feel. I don't really know how people really feel. The people that are really close to me, like some of the people locally here are like all about Moonstone, Quill, and really supportive and like have my back and encourage me constantly. And same thing with friends and family in Chicago too. So like I was getting a lot of support, but in my own head, I was just like, you know, thinking, oh, he being myself, he only has X amount of followers. He's only doing this. If he's dedicating his life to this stuff, what does he have to show for it? Nothing yet. He had like a couple hundred followers and a couple Instagram posts of some paintings and, you know, 2 music videos with like 1,000 something or 100 of views. Like, what has he been doing? And so like it was more that, and
Right.
there's certain people, friends and family, who kind of remain vague and a little detached and very neutral about it. So sometimes I'm like, oh, well, then they must think it's really stupid.
Right.
But very few people are like really critical of me, the way I'm living, and it's hard. And even just like preparing for this interview and like putting all this stuff together to share with you, to like tell my artistic journey, is like, oh, like for the first time it's like clicking with me, like, damn, this is like what I had been doing for my whole adult life. Like, this is it, huh? It's actually not so bad, like doing
Right.
this, making me feel better about it. Because like, you know, like I was like, I don't know, a lot of it too with me, like whether it's probably a problem with a lot of creative people. It's like you start something and then move on to something else and sort of just leave something a little bit abandoned. You could say that about my like painting career. Like I showed you all those paintings. I haven't painted paint to a canvas since 2020. And it's like, okay, so was I doing that because I wanted to be like a gallery artist and I wanted to build my craft? I don't know. And then it's like with my podcast, you know, I just kind of stopped podcasting in March, and is it like, okay, well, you put a lot of time and effort and energy into that. You got maybe 3K on YouTube, 3K followers. You got, you know, a shadow banned Instagram account that's dying by the day. You could, and I meet people in that world, in the YouTube and podcast world, who like stick to a formula and it has become their job. It's like, oh, did I fail at that because it's not really my full-time job? And with the music now, at least like this year in 2023 is the first time, like I said, like it feels like a big boy job in and of itself. So by default, I'm finally kind of putting my eggs in that basket for now. And it sucks too, because like every week I'm like, should I just like start podcasting again? Like, should I just get that going again? It's like, well, no, because your to-do list for the band has stuff that's like a month old. And the band is definitely progressing and we're making the correct changes to grow and to get better. Whereas before, I was clocking out of work, running to the bar across the street, plugging in my guitar, and going at it without really practicing or without really planning much. We were just like doing it. But now it's like it's turning more into like, okay, I got to get up early tomorrow and like send a bunch of emails and update the website and contact all these people, which is fun. Like it's I'm just getting the taste of like this is a big boy job. And I was getting a slight taste of that with the podcast because I was making some money with that, doing astrology readings, getting some income from that. But like that's a huge, and you're getting into this yourself with this right now. Like I'm sure you get it that this is like a huge time commitment. And
Yeah, and you have to hold yourself accountable too. You start feeling like you have to check in and just produce more and streamline things, and it's definitely a process.
and it can be, and it's fun work. Like it's work, but it doesn't feel like work when it's your baby.
Right.
And the podcast was my baby for like, I mean, years. And I was good at, I mean, I would get burnt out, especially in Colorado when I was doing all these things at once. I would just hit the limit and just stop putting stuff out for maybe a month or two. And that happened for the last time in March. And then this summer, like the band really kind of recovered from that hard year where people were leaving the lineup, where I was doubtful, where I didn't know if I wanted to continue doing it. But now suddenly it's like it feels like a big boy job that's fun and exciting to do. And it's crazy, but like most of these creative things, I was just in the moment. I would be like, in the moment I'm gonna start a painting, in the moment I'm gonna like write a song and play it at the shithole or whatever. But now I'm like, all right, literally, I mentioned it earlier, I'm like, you can play music until you're 80 years old. So like, what's my plan to keep it going the rest of my life? So it's like, it's almost a heavy thing to think about because like you treat it like a hobby. It's like just something
Right.
you love, it's precious and you just do it. And when the money comes, that's great. But now it's like,
How do you keep it going?
and I'm like, I'm saying this now, but even I'm like, are you sure? Like, are you sure it's the rest of your life? This is the one thing is this band. But that's how I feel now. And the cool thing too is like, even like with the podcast, like I made the astrology wall calendars where I was like doing digital art and like graphic design to make like a print wall calendar. And that was like, okay, I've had Adobe Creative Cloud since 2018 or whatever, because I had my astrology concept album that I wanted to make like Illustrator art for. But then it's like, okay, so then I spent all this time doing that for that like half-baked idea, pick up some basic skills on these things. And then like whatever, 6 years later, like Adobe digital stuff is like second nature to me. And I'm like, okay, I can use that to make merch with the band now. I can make logos. So like it's at least with something like a band where you're just like doing all the stuff on your own, you're doing the management, the booking, the marketing. Like it's not like, oh, I have to give up visual art now because I'm a musician. It's like, no, you're doing visual art to like make merch designs, or you're doing all of the stuff. So, and that was true
Well,
too of the podcast. So like all these things, you pick up the skills with all these things. And even my normie jobs, they weren't total wastes either. Cause like you learn how to be professional, and you have to be
Exactly.
professional with the band too. You have to learn sales things, and also just like at a certain point I was like managing people in property management. I was people's bosses.
Mhm.
It's not to say I'm the boss of the band at all, but like managing people within the band or the people you work with or the venues you work with, like there is, you get to take some of that with you. And that's the fun part of like this. Like I said, when I was starting off talking about what makes art, I was literally using it in the same breath as talking about ghosts and voodoo in New Orleans. Like it is this like airy fairy imaginative mental spiritual thing, but then you can you can turn it into a big boy job with time and
Exactly.
fate too, because like this just unfolded. We're talking, to me it seems like a very long time, and when I was talking about that time in the 2010s, most of the time I was like beating myself up like I'm not successful, I'm putting my heart and soul into this with nothing to show for it. Not enough followers or not enough gigs or money or whatever. But
Right. And
it just inevitably reaches this point at a certain point if you stick with it. And the only reason I stuck with it is because it's like in my being to do it. I can't not do it. So like,
exactly.
yeah.
Well, the point before of me asking that question about just like sort of perhaps looking scattered or perceiving yourself as scattered, I think you can see a pattern now where all of these experiences sort of culminate into something that's actually become um, your your main focus, and the way you're able to now do your music full time, and you have all these different skill sets now that you gathered from all these weirdo, some of them were good and some of them were not the preferred thing, but you did it anyway. And so I guess what I like to ask before we head off is, what kind of advice would you give to someone like you who, started out and maybe felt different pulls in different directions, and um, if they're starting out new or they're heading down a new path for themselves, what advice would you give them?
Um, Probably first and foremost is like look within. It sounds so generic and cheesy, but that's like where, at least for me, that's where ideas come from. So if you are, um, I don't, it's hard to say, like everybody has an imagination, and everybody, the imaginal realm is from, we'll go real woo woo right here. That is the realm of the gods. That's where angels and demons, your own personal angels and
Right.
demons dwell. And so you can be asleep to all of that and just like almost like close your third eye and just live your day-to-day life and not think about your life experiences or not think about these archetypal experiences. But if I feel like if you do that, you're not gonna get anywhere as an artist, because art is, to me, like the job of an artist is to be a vessel for stuff that comes out of the imagination. Like I like been thinking about the movie The Never Ending Story lately. Like
Love that.
that movie is like the plot of that movie is like when Fantasia is this like fantasy land where crazy, vivid, fantastical, epic stuff is happening. But the plot of that story is when the nothing, quote unquote, is taking that over and like destroying it. And um, if that's happening in your life, if you're just in the 3D, if you're just like taking life as it comes to you at face value and not looking at inside, if you're not daydreaming or if you're not receptive to imagination, like you're gonna just, I mean, it's not possible to not have an imagination, but like if it were, you would destroy yourself. Like it's like that story, like the nothing takes over and it's just nihilistic, you know? So to get back to, I guess, the advice, it's just like figure out ways to pay attention to your thoughts. So that could be like meditation, that could be keeping a journal, and it you can definitely get inspired and ideas from other people or outside sources, obviously, like reading a book, listening to a podcast or whatever, talking to somebody. But like I think the every great idea that has like turned into anything of value was sort of a download from somebody. Like Nikola Tesla or whoever, or like all these like great geniuses were tapped into their imaginations, and then they were like got these downloads and then made it a reality. And so that applies to like inventions or businesses or structures or whatever. It's everything comes from there. But like for the artist, like you really have to know how to work with that in order to create anything of value. So like I think just like being aware of that and being aware that you can take it too far. You can go schizophrenic. You can lose control if you fully let like the subconscious or the imagination just totally turn take over. You will be like babbling on the street corner. And we didn't really talk about drugs or psychedelics or altered states, but like people can grasp that when you take, and I'm like sober right now, so I'm not even advocating for this, but like people might be able to understand that if you take like a psychedelic, your mind will be opened up and all of that stuff, anything your imagination can create could seem very real to you. And people can get like ideas from doing stuff like that. I don't think you need to, but like that's sort of like a cheat code to like get into that space, I guess. But the only reason I really bring that up is because when people can take that too far and they get puddled, they go crazy, they go schizophrenic. So like I'm bringing that up because it's sort of also a warning, like your mental health, being grounded and understanding that here, like through health, nutrition, through grounding, you can really live a happy and fulfilled life. But in order to get those ideas, you have to know how to navigate your own imagination, and you have to be open to receiving ideas. And for me, like I said, it was really a lot of introspection, really a lot of alone time, a lot of driving. It could be time in nature, it could be taking walks, it could be anything like that where you're just by yourself. Um, and just kind of knowing how to like feed all of those things. And just like another side note, I guess when we're talking about advice is like once you have these ideas and these inspirations, you have to like do all the work to make them possible. If you have a song idea, you have to learn how to play the instrument. You have to sing. You have to learn how to sing. You have to learn how to get on stage and go in front of people. And that could take years. And I guess the first piece of advice that actually came to me was like, if you're an artist, get into the service industry, because that's something that took me years to get into. I mean, I drove Uber and Lyft while in Chicago at different points. But if you really want to like dedicate the time to some type of craft, you have to make sacrifices that require time, and you also have to, in a grounding way, be able to put food on the table, be able to pay your bills, and be able to function through some type of income. And the service industry is, to me, the most flexible, lucrative bang for your buck to be able to do that. And a lot of people, like even myself, like I thought, oh, I'm 23 years old. Most of the people that I know that are servers or bartenders started when they were 21. I guess it's too late for me. Like, don't ever think it's too late to find creative ways to pay the bills and like stay grounded. Because like having money and eating good food and like not having that lack is actually super helpful for like really getting shit done artistically. And I spent like a lot of time in this starving artist mindset, even though I had safety nets, I had options. I was never going to literally starve, but in my mind I was. And um the back and forth that I did of like a 9 to 5 salary with insurance type of job, at the end of the day, you can make that much money by dedicating half the amount of time, and by having a type of job that you do not take home with you. You do not get work emails if you work at a bar that you dread.
Right.
Like you
That's
get
very
like a
helpful.
big boy job, you are like, you like your phone will ring and you're like, I'm fired. Oh, this is it. Like you don't have that with the service industry. So I guess that's my basic advice.
It's excellent. Well, this has been great. I really appreciate you coming on and telling everybody about yourself and just your journey along the way. So thank you very much.